Hi. Before going to video, please subscribe to my channel for more interesting stuff. And the question is, what is the creepiest confession, most disturbing that you have heard from an otherwise normal person?
A friend had told me for years about the dark secret in his past that he can't tell anybody. Eventually he felt comfortable enough to confess, and he really was not exaggerating. When he was young he raped his younger sister. The family knew about it and they all got counseling and stuff at the time. He and his sister are friends now. But fuck that, my great uncle likes kids. It suddenly made a whole lot more sense that none of his adult daughters were ever married / had a serious LTR and are overweight with self-esteem issues. Every other aspect of his life is perfectly normal and I would have never expected that from him. There was a court case before I was born that was dismissed. My mother never even let me meet him until early this year, because she didn't want to take the chance that he might act indecently towards me. Edit, typo. On my way home from counseling, an elderly lady talked to me about her experience as a nurse in a mental institution. Some of the things she said were horrifying and sad. I think she was glad to get it off her chest. This included patients with schizophrenia who were abandoned by families, people admitted into the wards because of their homosexuality, with some very upsetting consequences, and more. Most involved patients taking their own lives. I sat there and listened, though I'm not sure how much of it actually sunk in until I got home. I started seeing a girl about a month ago. She recently told me she was raped when she was 5. Her parents were druggies and had her at a young age, so she stayed with her grandma. But my girl's grandma was a drunk, so she would have her son, my girl's uncle, take care of her. He was about 25 when this happened. As the story goes, he went to go score whatever drugs he was on at the time and left his 5-year-old niece unattended in the car for who knows how long. When he returned, he found her covered in blood. She had reconstructive surgery on her vagina from where the guy tore her open. She confided all of this in me before I went down on her because she has confidence issues because one side looks stretched. Doesn't bother me one bit. She says she still remembers his face and tries not to think about it. The most fucked up thing is when the uncle brought her home, they did nothing. Because he was buying drugs at his dealer's house when it happened, they did nothing to save the fuckhead uncle that brought the 5-year-old around a bunch of junkies. Who knows what actually happened? He could have allowed it to happen for drugs. About 6 months after this happened, he killed himself. Odd. My girl says she doesn't like talking about it, so I don't ever bring it up. But I know it has definitely affected her mentally. I just wish there was something I could do to help her forget. TL, doctor, my girl got molested when she was 5 while her uncle scored drugs and nothing was done about it. Had an absolutely charming, incredibly smart-looking close friend for a few years. It took me about 1.5 to 2 years to find out everything about her life was a lie. Even the smarts, she'd read some detailed article on a subject and present ideas as if they were her own, but never knew anything deeper. Pretended to speak many languages by secretly watching a foreign movie with subs on, then translating some cool scenes to us. She made up a story about her father abusing her mom to make excuses for failing her uni exams, lied to people about being a medical student to look smart, and would give them very dangerous advice. Lied to her family about being a brilliant medical student, don't know if they believed her, and about many other things. She was an incredibly fun person, but an awful toxic friend. Still, I was afraid she'd lose her mind completely if I revealed her secrets to everyone. So I only quietly told the people she was abusing or potentially putting in danger, so she couldn't do any damage anymore. Several times I tried to talk her into going into therapy, but I stopped. She was in complete denial about me knowing everything. I was so afraid she'd kill herself if she found out what everyone thought of her. One day she just packed her things, said goodbye with a hug and a huge smile on her face, and left for another country to pursue her medical studies. I've kept evidence of all the craziness in case it comes back someday. I'd say that if you genuinely pay attention to people around you, you'll find out many creepy stories like this. Some people see friends come and go, and actually never have any idea of what's going on in their lives. Wow. It's crazy how common this type of person is. Once I was out with a person like that. We were sitting side by side at dinner, and 2 of our friends were sitting across from us. Mid-meal, the liar's phone rings. Since I'm right next to her, I see that it clearly reads Mom on the caller ID, and she presses ignore. No biggie, she can call her back later, it's rude to answer a call during dinner anyway. But then, she starts talking about how it's her ex who called her, and how she's too afraid to pick up the phone. She suddenly tells us that her ex is this crazy stalker type person who abused her for years and who keeps tracking down her phone numbers and addresses no matter where she moves. and how the police won't believe her and how she's always so afraid of seeing him on the streets. She started shaking and crying and everything. It was quite the performance. If I hadn't clearly seen that it was her mom who called her, I would have believed it. And for what? What was the point of that? That was the day I really realized how much this chick lied. It was insane. Wow. That's so similar to how one housemate I had was. Great fun, smart, interesting, generous. And then he gradually started losing control of his web of lies, leading, over a few months, to a breakdown and suicide attempt. Around his hospital bed, we all, family, friends, etc., put the pieces together and worked out how he'd been playing us off against each other, telling each group of us lies about others and so on. But we never could persuade him that he had serious problems he needed to deal with. As far as he was concerned, there had never been an overdose of pills, just some bad food poisoning. He was so used to lying that even once we had seen through it, he kept lying to himself. He eventually recovered, with much less damage than the doctors had expected, dropped out of uni and moved away. I bumped into him once a few years later, coincidentally. He was looking a bit worse for wear, but still alive, which TBH was more than I'd expected. My ex-boyfriend could not handle our breakup. I broke it off with him because of significant issues, drugs, stealing, etc. I finally got out of it. He didn't. He would not give up on me. At first he was desperate at trying to get back with me, following me, waiting in obscure locations for when I walked to my car, and even threatening to kill himself if I didn't see him. I blocked his numbers, changed my email, transferred colleges, moved a state away, and tried to move on with my life. He was in and out of jail for drugs and stealing in addition to concealed weapons charges. Which was scary for me knowing all the times when he confronted me alone. It was about 4 or so years later when I received the creepiest phone call. It was him calling to tell me that he was looking for me all this time. The tone of his voice, the horrific laughter, I freaked out. I called my parents and informed them, hey, if I go missing, this is who has me. I called campus security and made sure they had his description. He never showed up, but my God, the voice on the other end of the line still brings chills. It scares me to this day that he is out there possibly looking for me. Luckily I've become more aware of precautions to take. Pepper spray, learning self-defense, etc. If I was in another state where obtaining a gun was easier, I would have done so. Unfortunately it's not so easy where I am now. I do however have panic buttons and GPS locators, so if something were to happen, I can be found. I try not to let fear or paranoia run my life. I try to take the best precautions, but I will always have that fear that just around the corner, he will be waiting for me. I work with a Polish dude who barely speaks English. He's a lovable 40-something dude, who just drinks vodka and laughs infectiously all day long. A textbook carefree scamp. Every couple of months everyone from work heads to a bar that hook us up with half-price drinks for that particular night. It's pretty sweet. So anyway, this Polish dude and I were at the end of a long 10-person bench laughing about nothing and drinking ice-cold cruiser, after ice-cold cruiser. It was great. Eventually we, somehow, got onto the topic of what he did before he came to England. After a few brews his English became even more scattered, but he did try, bless him. So he says he was in the army and so on and so forth, after which he said I shoot 7 men dead. Now that might not seem too heavy for you, but it blew me away. He was on the front lines during the Kosovan War. From what I could gather, I couldn't, and didn't want to, get too much more out of him due to the language barrier. Also, some gnarly, illegal shit happened during that war, which I don't think I could bear to know about. Keep smiling, Pete. Unfortunately this is about me. I told a friend and they were pretty creeped out about it, and I'm quite embarrassed of it really. I've never done it again, and it's really changed the way I talk to people online. My Reddit account has some very easy to follow steps to find out who I am. So I only post positive things, very tame critiques, and that's about it. My account has my name that I share with a lot of other things, previous online accounts etc. But my story is about how I cyberstalked a BF3 hacker just because he was being annoying. When BF3 became free to play, I joined a TDM server. I have quite a few hours on BF3, 300 plus, and I really enjoyed it. To see a full server again was quite fun, and I was kicking ass. Then this guy joins. This guy starts kicking ass, heading-shotting me from across the map. I don't think too much of it, but I ask, hey man, is that all skill? He responds it is, and he's streaming. BF3 isn't a very popular game, so it took less than a minute to find his Twitch stream. Just look for a picture of the same map being played and his was the first. Clearly hacking. Boxes on screen, snapping headshots, the whole 9 yards. So now I had his stream. I called it out in game, linked the stream and he left, was booted a minute later. In that minute he was joking about how, as the game was free, he could just get another account and keep going. On his stream he wasn't talking but he was typing. He was typing to another streamer. Now his stream just had me as a viewer. I was pretty bored and he had my attention. He hadn't really ruined my gaming experience, it was just, who is this douche? His Twitch name matched his Twitter name, which he used to promote his stream. His Twitter was filled with bully, trolling posts at people and he was just a smarmy douchebag. No photos though. His name was included, but it wasn't a very unique name. Now I have a Twitter account, and a name. This is where it gets even worse. I start to troll his posts. Going back months, I find a post that links him to a town. I Google search the town and his name, bingo. A post about Australia Day and how he thought this town had put on a really bad show, just saying how bad it was etc and trolling people in the comments. It was a small town and people were biting, you should organize it if you think you're so great etc. He was eating it up. But I had his Facebook. Start looking into his profile, posts were private but the Facebook URL closely matched the Twitter, so I knew it was him. The profile pics were nondescript, banned pages, random shit like that. But this guy had a girlfriend, her profile was public and she kept tagging him in posts. It was so cringy, I love you boo, you are my world, the most beautiful girl I know, etc etc. The guy and his girlfriend were two ham planets, he was the epitome of keyboard warrior, he had a fedora wearing lens flare edited profile picture, it was actually just perfect. It was just so satisfying that this guy was the stereotype personified. I could have left it there, but I had to go a step further. I created another Twitch account, just to let the guy know I found him. I posted his Facebook details in the chat of Twitch. There was like max 4 people watching him stream, but you could see it pop up on his stream chat, him pause mid-game and just not do anything for like 5 seconds. He closed the stream. Back in my early 20s, I'm 41 now, I had a small group of close friends. We'd get together after work and on weekends to smoke weed or drink. Sometimes someone would bring someone new. One new guy I'll call Scott started to hang out frequently on weekends. Seemed normal but mostly quiet. One night Scott gets stoned and tells the group how a neighbor abducted him and his younger brother at knife point from the woods behind their house and forced him to perform sex acts with his younger brother while the neighbor watched. If they balked or refused, the guy would cut them or poke them with the knife. Scott's telling this story like he's no longer aware we are even in the room. He's looking through us. He tells us that the guy lets them go after like 8 hours. When Scott gets home, his little brother runs and hides, so he goes and tells his mom what happened, but she doesn't believe him and claims he's making it up to excuse the two boys for being late. The next day Scott's little brother still wouldn't come out of his room, so Scott tells his dad, then takes his dad and shows him his little brother's bleeding rectum. Scott tells us everything goes to hell from there. The cops are called, the story has to be told over and over again. Scott's parents' marriage explodes due to his mom not believing the story or even informing the father about it. Scott's mom tells everybody remotely close to the family the details, which embarrasses and humiliates both the boys. Scott says he tried to block it out, but his little brother is tormented by it despite tons of therapy. Parents divorce and Scott's dad is custody. Scott continues telling us how his brother blames him for everything for years. The little brother was sodomized by Scott multiple times during the ordeal. So a couple years go by and Scott's little brother is guilting him the whole time. The little brother decides the only way he can forgive Scott and get past it is if he gets to do to Scott what Scott was forced to do to him. Guilts Scott into it through a lot of blame and then threats of suicide. Afterwards the younger brother tells the parents and immediate family what he did to Scott. Then the brother decides he can't live with what he did with Scott. Brother writes in his suicide note that he can't understand how Scott could live with himself after what Scott did to him because he can't live with what he did to Scott. The younger brother hanged himself. Scott tells this whole story to us, then he curls up in fetal position and starts bawling his eyes out. Everybody is just stunned. We did bong hits till Scott cried himself out, then the dude who first brought Scott in takes him home. We never see Scott again. Out of nowhere my ma tells me my dad drunkenly confessed that he and his cousin, whom my mom later dated and had a kid with, picked up a hitchhiker out near the beach in the early 90s. They were intoxicated and one thing led to another and they ended up killing the guy and burying him in a remote location in some sand dunes. She assumed he was trying to scare her into staying with him since they were going through a breakup, and she shrugged it off as machismo bullshit. So the story goes, years later a story comes up on the news. They are asking for information about remains found buried in a sand dune. She's not really paying attention until they start describing this large belt buckle that may help identify the man. She flips the fuck out because my dad had bragged about taking the guy's belt off, which had a huge Texas-style buckle, and beating him with it, making fun of the buckle and stuff. Next day the cousin calls and tells her he or his buddies would not hesitate to kill us if she breathes a word. Anyways, she always felt really guilty about not turning them in, but after losing my sister, she died very young. She couldn't fathom losing me as well. The rest is history. They are free dudes. When I was 14 at a sleepover with my best friend, she told me that she used to live next door to a pedophile. He touched up and raped 2/3 of his kids, one boy and one girl, who then told the police, who didn't believe them. Especially because the mom told them they were making it up for attention. He then went to do charity work in Africa and may have assaulted them, we don't know. Then he came back to England and then assaulted one of his grandkids. This little girl told her mom, who was assaulted by him too. The little girl, her mom and her brother, the 3 victims of this man, 2 of them now adults, then went to the police. This time the police realized their past mistake and arrested the man, but he died before he could be prosecuted. I knew this previously, but she told me, you have those random snippets of childhood memories and you don't know whether they're real, imagination or dream. I nodded. Well, I have one of these about going up and down the road on my scooter when I was about 5 and him sitting in his garage. He called me into the garage and shut the door. Then about an hour later I left. That's all I remember, but a couple of years ago I was trying to put my first tampon in and there wasn't that skin stuff that's supposed to be there. That barrier. And I've never cycled, rode a horse or done gymnastics. She looked really distressed when she said this. I have a completely normal friend, we're both in our early 40s now, that shared with me his childhood story of living with a ghost. Every night he had a ghost that would walk down the hallway into his bedroom and just stare at him, sometimes making noises, but usually quiet. He was so petrified that he would pull the sheets over his head. When this first happened, he would scream or run down the hallway to his parents' bedroom, but they would always turn him back to his own bedroom and tell him that his imagination was running wild. Over time, he actually grew accustomed to this apparition, but was still freaked out by it. I, personally, don't believe in ghosts and think that it must have been something else. But because my friend has such a type A and a no bullshit personality, I admit that I found it creepy. The hairs stood up on the back of my neck, to listen to him tell this story with such a nonchalant and straightforwardness. He eventually moved out of his childhood home when he was a teenager, and these ghost episodes have never reoccurred. There are different people living in his childhood home now, and he said that he would never go back there again. Was good friends with this nerdy, slightly overweight guy in high school. He was pretty hilarious at times, but vindictive and mean-spirited when he was hurt. So, pretty normal teenage nerd guy, right? We would look at messed up shit online all the time and talk about crazy stuff, and I guess this made him comfortable opening up about his neighbor. He and his neighbor were friends since childhood. He brought me over to introduce me. Guy immediately comes off as a creep. He has his dog kenneled in his room and a drawer full of weird dildos that he proudly showed off to me. I never went back. My friend later tells me that the two sucked each other off and had anal sex on the reg. I'm like, okay, that's weird, but they are experimenting, so whatever. Well, it didn't end there. The neighbor got him to watch the neighbor fucking his dog, telling him how dogs were into making love to humans and he was in love with his dog. He also convinced him to film the neighbor fucking his horse. Supposedly my friend only ever fucked the dog, but Jesus, that is still some fucked up shit. I never looked at him the same afterwards. Guy is a raging alcoholic pill abuser last I heard.
Thanks for watching. Please do like, share, comment and subscribe for more videos.